Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Andrew Hewling, the Chief Technology Officer here at Gravitate, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. The topic of today's conversation is the Association IT Maturity Model from a data perspective. And while we have a lot to discuss in the next hour, we welcome questions and invite you to submit them at any time using the written chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. Everyone in the audience is muted, and we will be sending you all a link to a recording of this webinar afterwards. I'm one of 4 presenters on our panel today, and I'll provide a quick bit of background on each of us. As I said, my name is Andrew Hewling, and I lead the teams responsible for the development and implementation of Nucleus, Gravitate's data analytics platform for associations. I also oversee our internal IT team. I have undergraduate and graduate degrees in computer science from Harvard University and have spent much of my career creating new software products in a variety of industries. My co-moderator is Dave Coryell, President and co-founder of DelCor Technology Solutions and leader of DelCor's strategic and operational functions. Dave is the author of DelCor's IT Maturity Model for associations and nonprofits, which helps organizations align their technology initiatives with their strategic plans and business goals, and also happens to be the framework we're using for our discussion today. Dave is also an adjunct professor at Georgetown University, where he teaches requirements analysis. He has a BS in Computer and Information Science from Syracuse University and an MBA from the University of Maryland. Joining Dave and I today are 2 of the savviest association IT executives you'll encounter anywhere: John McKinney of AACR, the American Association for Cancer Research, and Mark Wilson of ACOG, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. John is Director of Enterprise Architecture and Development at AACR and has deep technical expertise in enterprise architecture, development, and data governance. He has a history of building teams, breaking down borders, and integrating engineering with internal business stakeholders. And he's been doing just that for the past 2 years at AACR, where he's guided several major transitions, including an AMS migration from IMS to Salesforce, in an environment with deep data silos and numerous differences in process. As part of these efforts and to introduce organizational standards and data governance, John formed an architectural review board, which follows strict process, provides technical leadership across the organization, sets technology and data governance standards, and determines future technology direction. Mark Wilson is Chief Information Officer at ACOG, where he's led all aspects of information technology for the past 7 years. He also oversees ACOG's membership services team, giving him a unique perspective on the wants and needs of ACOG's primary customers, its members. Prior to joining ACOG, Mark was the VP of IT engineering for a global satellite services company. He has also had technology leadership positions in a variety of industries, ranging from professional services and legal to government contracting and higher education. Mark has undergraduate and graduate degrees in information systems and is a certified project manager. Just want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today as we talk about the road to IT data maturity at your organizations and just generally. So before we hear from John and Mark and their stories, I wanted to turn it over to Dave, excuse me. And so Dave could give us a little background on the Association IT Maturity Model for the attendees who may not be familiar with it, what it is, how it has evolved over time, and particularly with respect to data, which is what we're talking about today.
Thanks, Andrew. So first, I'm always shooting my mouth off because I have a Mac, and I always say everything just works on a Mac. And so I apologize, my camera is not on because for some reason today, everything doesn't work on a Mac right off the bat. So I'm going to stop shooting my mouth off about that. And I even combed my hair today and shaved. So, you know, which during COVID is not a big thing for me. So anyway, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. The IT maturity model was something we started about 12 years ago now. And I originally started writing it as an example of what the ideal association IT dependent programs would look like. And it turned into the model because really what we started to talk about was, you know, what are the 4 areas of IT, or what are the areas of IT an association or nonprofit has to be concerned about? And then what different states might they be in? So data is one of the major areas. So that became one of the 4 areas of IT. And just real quickly, the 4 of them, besides data, there's infrastructure, and by that we mean, you know, physical and now virtual servers, you know, the actual back-end systems as we used to refer to them. There's the 3rd area, which is the digital area, you know, social, mobile, web, your online presence basically. And then the 4th area is IT management and governance. which quickly over a couple of years really, but in the history of it, of the IT maturity model, we realized the IT governance and management piece is an underlying part of all the different areas. And I'm sure that'll come up a lot today as it relates to data and data governance being related to the actual data itself and the technology of the data. In those 4 areas, what we came up with was that each of the areas could be in one of 4 different states. It could be in a restrictive state, meaning you just can't get what you want done. It could be in a functional state, meaning you can get it done, but it's really convoluted or hard. An effective state, which means it works and gets done what it's supposed to get done. And then lastly, kind of an innovative or strategic enabling state. What can the organization do, not only well, but that's new or something they couldn't see before that allows them to develop new value propositions, new products or services, et cetera. So those are the 4 areas of the IT maturity model, as well as the 4 different states that each one might be in. And it's really a framework for us that we do a lot of our consulting around. And it was interesting, in 2015-16, ASA adopted it through the foundation to do a research project for the association nonprofit community about IT maturity and data and IT readiness. And it was interesting to see the researchers kind of turned it more into a research model as opposed to a framework that's great for conversations and moving organizations along those rungs. So that's 12 years of work on this in a nutshell. Does that give enough overview?
That was a great overview, and I think we've seen that as well. I mean, just in implementing Nucleus, when there's kind of that good management and governance in place, then the projects tend to be a lot more successful. So yeah, I totally agree with that shift, because that tracks with what we kind of see out in the field as well. So now, turning to John and Mark, before we get into your stories about kind of the data maturity journeys at your organizations, maybe you could share a bit about what data governance means to you and at your organizations. John, do you want to go first?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I will apologize briefly as well. I always say everything works on a Windows Surface, and that's not the case today. So yeah, so at the NACR, our maturity is, we are maturing. We went down this significant transformation road less than 3 years from now. And I think what I realized off the bat is that, typically there's a software evaluation or some project that you must complete that pushes the objective further, but doesn't really allow enough time to develop a framework for how you're going to run the product. Typically, the project just makes it in at the wire, just like we all tried to put our video on at the wire. But who's going to run it, and how are you going to keep the data clean? And typically with our maturity model is, in the past, you're used to, in the association space, manipulating the data to get the results. You go into a screen, typically not a lot of automation or governance. You manipulate the data, and then you write a report that helps present that data. So our approach is, we learned at least, is that practice will break every automation and every rule that you have. And so if you don't have a maturity model, particularly around who owns the data and how the changes to the system occur, then you can really get yourself into trouble. So of course, like everything else, we had to implement first, figure out how to run and mature later, and we are maturing. But over the past 3 years, the biggest value for us was to establish a formal business engineering process to make sure that we actually understand the requirements, that cross-functionality is understood, and that everybody, takes their pulse, takes a break for a moment, and ensures that everything is thought through. So for us, we are maturing. I don't think anybody is ever there, because technology changes, but you have to have some framework to follow and follow it.
Yeah. How about you, Mark?
Yeah, I would agree. And I would also like to just state that we're maturing as well as an organization, and how we use data and how we what we respect with data and how we incorporate it into what we do. And with regards to data governance, you know, my opinion and my perspective on it is evolving. I mean, data governance, something like risk management and the like, where they just have negative connotations, or it's not something you just get excited to, hey, let's go do data governance today. But it's so critically important. And I think really what struck home to me was it's very simple, but early in our data governance process, we started doing definitions and just simple things, membership definitions, things that you know, everybody in the room understands what an expiration is and a grace period and a termination or a rejoin or a reinstatement. We all know those things. And then we realized we were all talking about different things. And when we really got to the details of it, we recognized that we needed some form of good governance in just even building out our definitions and then taking that onto what data do we collect? Does it make sense to collect this? Where do we store it? How do we store it? And then all the processes that sit behind it. And I believe that we wouldn't be where we are with our data program if it weren't for a good data governance infrastructure and framework that we've set up. And it's maturing, and we've got a lot of work to do on it. And once again, it's still, sometimes it's a bit of a grind trying to get people interested and motivated to do the hard work, but it really makes a tremendous difference as you move forward.
And if I may just, you know, add to Mark's comment, for us, you know, transformation is hard. And as you heard, our organization, you know, we had IMIS application, and it was, you know, business owned at the time. So IT was really, you know, we were responsible in setting up databases and things like that, but we didn't really have a pulse on the data, even if we did have a common vocabulary. So oftentimes people are uncomfortable with that. We actually didn't start with data governance. We started with what we call data normalization, because it's a little bit easier. It's more palatable to everybody. We just want to agree on what countries we look at and how we deal with, you know, World Bank issues. How do we want to interpret that? Let's all agree on that. And we'll worry about the governance keyword, which can make people uncomfortable. We'll worry about that after we've all agreed on what we agree on. So we approached it in a step. If you go from, you know, 0 to 100 and govern everything while you're still learning, it's difficult for everybody. So we, like, you know, very creative, step it up, step it through the organization. And a governance officer, officers, or people interested in governance, they will come out on their own instead of having to formalize and pick it. So it's a more natural process, I would say.
Yeah,
and John, just to piggyback on that, oh, sorry, Andrew.
very good.
I was going to say, you know, governance is sometimes a bad word, and we characterize it as data enablement very early on. And I think that just changing the perspective, I think, helps bring people on board with the conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I like both of those because, I mean, we see that all the time where you talk about data governance and it's people just associate it with this very heavy, long process, you know, with lots of just diving down into the weeds of things. And so any way you can make it, you know, kind of get those quick wins to make it easier, or even just shift what you're calling it so that it doesn't have that negative connotation, I think goes a long way. So John, maybe now you could kind of dive in and tell us about your experience over the last couple of years at AACR, you know, as you've seen your organization and really helped your organization, you know, go through some of those stages of the IT maturity model with respect to data in particular.
Absolutely. If you're like us, when you have a system that is, you know, specific to an industry such as IMIS, and it's homegrown in the sense that as you figure out your business process, you develop data and screens, which is by no means the wrong way to do it. But I think the one thing that you lose when you have maturity is, how do I interact with vendors? As a professional scientific organization, you know, we run many, you know, live meetings and now virtual meetings due to COVID. We run these both as our own organization and with partners. And as you start to add systems, in our case, we have a technical publications division, we have marketing, we have a foundation. All of these business units using a singular system is okay, but if you don't have a maturity model, then what happens is you're doing data loads and you're manipulating the data, and a report becomes a project. And we finally put the hold on it when we had a report that took us 3.5 weeks to build. We said there has to be a problem if it takes 3.5 weeks to build a report. And this was 1.5 years into our migration into Salesforce and Fontiva, and the system was working really well. And we said, we have a problem. If it takes this long, then that means that the data that is in our system is not accurate enough in its current form, in its native form, in the way the system was intended to provide business value. So what's the problem? How do we figure out how to manipulate, in this case, the model for, as Mark said, there's different memberships. Well, some memberships have different rules than other memberships, but at the end of the day, there's subscriptions in our system. And, if you have to do a reinstatement or a transfer, or if your dues have expired, in the system as designed, everything halts. But in reality, organizations don't work that way. We still want you to attend a meeting. We still want you to speak at an event and engage with us. We don't want to treat you like Apple or some vendor where you just can't log in and you lose everything. So for us, the journey that I took us on is we have to mature, and we have to have a platform. We have to think about this as a platform. It's not a business application. The project was actually called the ECRM, or the Enterprise CRM. So by nature, by definition, there needs to be a model in place. So I took us from a project management waterfall methodology into a agile Scrum-based methodology, which doesn't always work. We're not inventing widgets, and there's reports and data loads and things that are going to come in. So we don't worry about perfect burn downs, but we do have a stand up, and we do set priorities, and we set product solutioning, and we make sure that the business signs off, and we don't start a project without a charter. So I think what Mark said in another call that we had was, organizations don't always act as competitive, or they're not accustomed to acting competitive in the digital landscape. And really, if you want to have an online experience that's integrated, where your user experience is the same across the board, you have to have a platform policy in place. So that's essentially how we did it, is think that every project touches the enterprise. There are no one-off projects anymore. You can't just go get some donation platform because you want to bring more donors in. Everything needs to have an enterprise first methodology, because that trickles down. And the awareness and the normalization and just putting some process in place, other than, oh, I created a ticket and I want IT to satisfy that ticket and close it, that process had to change. And so we put formality around it.
Yeah, thanks, John. I mean, I agree. It's very important to have that kind of cohesion between the different business units, particularly with respect to technology, the technology that they're using to collect this data and report on. So now, Mark, you've been with ACOG for 7 years.
Andrew?
Yes, go ahead.
Can I just jump in and say one thing, because I loved what you just said, John, and it really illustrated the difference, or the link between data and data governance in that quadrant about IT and IT management and management and governance. Because when you were talking about projects not starting without charters and flipping methodologies from waterfall to agile, and that doesn't always work, and why it doesn't, there's a whole different webinar on why that whole topic right there, right? But that tie between the IT team not just taking tickets and solving them, and getting into the business unit's business and influencing and understanding what the platform needs to be, is so critical to the idea of moving along that continuum of both data and IT management and governance maturity. So when we kind of prepped for this, I didn't hear that whole story before, and I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I agree. So Mark,
Yeah.
you've been with ACOG for 7 years, and you are responsible for both IT and membership, which is a little different, I think. Maybe gives you a different perspective than most IT execs out there, because you're kind of on both sides as service provider, but also customer, kind of internally.
Right.
Can you tell us what your experience has been like? So particularly again as it relates to kind of becoming that data journey and becoming more mature as an organization.
Yeah, sure. And it's interesting. So something that John started with was, he was trying to do a report, and it took 3.5 weeks to develop that report, right? And I'd love to hear when I'm done from you and Dave, like, is this a consistent pattern? Because we were kind of the same, but it was more death by 1,000 cuts from us. We couldn't get a good report, right? We'd run reports, and we're a NetForum customer, and it's a transactional system, and so we're trying to do just some trending and understanding what's happening in our membership and things like that, and we couldn't get good data. And every time we'd run a report, we'd get different results, and then we'd present a report, and then the consumer of that report or the key stakeholder would then ask just a small variant off that. Well, what about this group or this membership type? And then we'd have to go and start all the way over, and we wouldn't come out with the same data again. And so we just kept churning and churning to produce reports. And that was kind of the watershed moment for us to really get us involved and motivated to get better around data. So yeah, so even as recently as a few years ago, we were, I think, on the maturity model, we were somewhere between stages 1 and 2. We have good collaborative IT and membership teams, and I'll say, with my role overseeing both departments, it really helps, because there are often a lot of log jams between membership services. I'm not getting what I need, my systems aren't working the appropriate way, and then also working with the technologists, helping them to understand that we have people on the front line supporting our members, and they're running these challenges, which you seem is pretty simple from a just from a general IT perspective, but certainly as it relates to the association management system and directly supporting our members. To me, it's a great opportunity, and I feel really fortunate to be able to see both perspectives of that. But a few years ago, we were, like I said, somewhere between the first and second stages of the maturity model, teams working together, data not integrated, can't do reports, not a repeatable process, things of that nature. And we were really fortunate, and the organization started looking from the board at strategic initiatives and wanted to really realign us differently as an organization. And we had a DTI project, which I'm sure many of the people on the webinar today are familiar with DTI projects. And I was able to kind of roll data into that DTI project, and I think it was really helpful. That was the kickstart that we needed, because we could sit around and complain about the data all day long, and it was the technology tool set. It was also the people and the skill set. We weren't data focused, and so we didn't necessarily have it, and the reporting capabilities and the processes and things of that nature. So that's what really kick-started us into it, is just a recognition that we're not effective with reporting. There's underlying data. Here's a new initiative. Let's bundle it with that initiative, because we probably wouldn't be where we are today if we didn't have this more global strategic initiative where there was funding available.
Yeah, that's great. Dave, does that track, as you work with clients, does that track with your experience, that story? It certainly does for me.
Yeah, and I was almost muting because this sounds so familiar, right? Mark's story and your story, John. And it's so true that what you both identified kind of as the catalyst of change within the organization, because more CEOs than not, more than less, right, have said to us, I don't understand, like, what's going on here? I ask what I perceive as a seemingly simple question, and it takes 2 to 3 days for me to get an answer to the question. So I'm not even talking about generating reports. And John, you mentioned 3.5 weeks to get a report. I get that as a red flag on the field, right? We need to do something different. And these are just query type questions. And the CEO, he or she will say to us, like, what's going on here that's taking so long? Can you help us figure it out? And it's in that super restrictive state, you know, rung one, so to speak, of the IT maturity model, where there's basically a, you know, Cirque du Soleil level of manipulation and machinations going on the back end, with humans doing all these amazing things to produce the answer to the question of, hey, can you tell me who has given more than, you know, $10,000 to the foundation that's also an exhibitor and is in the San Diego area, because I want to drop in on them? Okay, I'll let you know in 3 days. Right? That's the type of thing that drives, I think, CEOs or the head of foundation or whatever development crazy. So we're always curious, because it's not always, sometimes, but it's not always the technology. It's not always the enterprise architecture. You know, it's different things too. So I'm kind of curious from all three of you, like, what do you see keeping organizations from getting up to the effective or strategic enabling state? What is it what's the root, or some of the, it's probably not one thing, but what are some of the reasons that organizations don't get there and then change and get there?
Well, I'm sure Mark and I will have different answers, so this is probably going to be interesting. But, you know, back on the report aspect, for us, we can't afford, we have a very small team, and there are, you know, things are going on, and then COVID hits, and, you know, our maturity really happened right around when it happened last year. And really for us, if you can't put everybody in a room and painstakingly detail your process, for us, the processes weren't mapped out. We didn't have a repository of, you know, level 1, level 2, level 3 functionality. And remember, the business owned the application before. So we're learning in a vacuum of how does IMIS translate to Fontiva and what is the output. So the report for us, it was very forensic. I told my, you know, the CFO, I said, I understand it should be simple. I understand it shouldn't take so long, but we only have 2 options. Stop the entire organization and all of our progress and sit everybody in a room and do a consulting style, you know, business outcome mapping, get a repository and a complete understanding, which is virtually impossible, or let us spin our wheels on these reports until it goes from, you know, the onion effect. You peel the onion, and eventually every onion has its core, its center. Some onions are big, some are small. Peel it away until the report, you have that aha moment, and finance and membership and foundation, everybody agrees. Yes, that's exactly the number of members that we have and the number of attendees. Take that information, let it happen. Just formulate your team. My team is more family centric. We yell at each other. Everything is out on the open. You can never have an excuse that you have an issue with somebody. So get it out, let the frustrations get out, but let the errors occur, for us anyway, so you can forensically discover through the data where the failure points are, and then go to the stakeholders with a solution that meets their business process need. It doesn't really change what they have to do, but you're going to have to manipulate the system and figure it out. So for us, the framework was, you know, be a detective, explain, figure out why the data isn't working. If the system is working and the output is bad, then the magic, as you said, in the background, you know, somebody's using the wrong kind of wand or what have you. So for us, it was all about, you have to discover it. And it's we all know, most of us that have done these before, it's a 3 to 5 year or longer maturity when you implement a new system, no matter how great the software fit is, no matter how great the consultant is, no matter how many months, years, or days you perform requirements. You're not going to get there day one when you implement. As long as you have a process to constantly mature and have, for us, there's run the engine and there's innovation. You know, run the engine first and leave some exploration and figure it out.
Yeah, and I would just speak a little more broadly about culture. I really think it's an organization that culturally values data, and they're looking for data for business intelligence and to help make good decisions, whether it be products or events or just day-to-day decisions. And I think if you don't have a culture that is looking for that, and I can tell you back in our earlier culture where we couldn't produce good reports, we couldn't produce reliable data, and every single report I produced, I had, asterisks all over it, where, well, it could be this or it could be that, and that was accepted many times within the organization. So as we've grown and we've evolved and we've matured from a data perspective, I really think the organization is maturing too, and that's not acceptable. And so once you get to that state where it's not acceptable, then people are willing to put the time and energy and resources into the hard work of building that framework, and then you're going to produce the good data.
Yeah, and so for us, I mean, we've seen, with just kind of numerous clients, either coming and they've, had issues in kind of prior engagements, or even, some clients that we've seen that it's been a little bit more difficult, even just going through like the nucleus implementation and rollout. There's a few factors that tend to really help. So I think, Mark, kind of related to that culture, we call it the fear of sunlight, that there's sometimes people at the organization who don't want people looking at the data for their department, their data, right? Because of what it might show, or they don't believe that it's right, or and so we definitely see that. Like we had one client where the person who was responsible for all the email marketing really didn't want anyone else to see the email marketing numbers and open rates and performance of campaigns and things like that. Another common thing is just not having, beyond just kind of broad support, I think executive support, or like an important decision maker champion, having that in place who can really push the organization, like you and Mark and John can, like that is so important to making sure that it's successful, because there's always going to be some people who push back, but being able to kind of say, no, we're doing this, or we're moving, we need to do this to be better, to make the business better, is really important. And then there's a couple of other things. I think just it's not starting too big always, right? That being able to kind of keep momentum going with small wins. And John, you're touching on that, I think, a little bit, in that it's important to be able to demonstrate kind of over and over again that this is good, this is progress, and there's reasons. And so kind of continually having small wins is really important. And I guess the last one, which is really more technological, but we often see, because we're dealing with vendors that are already in place a lot of times, and products, is there's a lot of source systems. And so I think it's really important that kind of as you're choosing systems, making sure that you're thinking about data from the outset, right? Costs of getting data out of that system, access, whether there's easy access for data uses, right? As opposed to just kind of transactional point-to-point integrations with other systems, or single sign-on, thinking more about like bulk extraction and for analytics purposes, and making sure that those systems have that in place, and that it's not cost prohibitive for the organization. Because we've seen a number of organizations who feel like they can't proceed with particular data initiatives because of the costs associated with getting data out of the system, that it's their data, right? And they shouldn't be able. So it's a variety of things, but I do think it's it's important to have that. The cultural piece is probably the most important, the desire to be using data better.
I think that those are three really good sets of examples, and it all ties back to what something, well, it doesn't all, but one of the things it ties to is, John, you made the point of nothing's done day one and it's not perfect. And then that's what, in some cases, inhibits an adoption rate, right, within the organization for the quote unquote new platform. Or, the number of times we've heard an organization say, well, when we get the new database, or when we have the new data analytics tool, we'll be able to do these things. And that's only 1/90th of what the actual answer is. It's not the new X. You between the three of you pulled out, I wrote down the things that keep or need to be in place for an organization to make the most of their data is the culture of appreciating data. There needs to be a champion, whether it's the CEO or high level, or the business units. There's sometimes fear of exposing things that aren't right. We see that all the time. And even what you mentioned earlier about what are we going to consider a lapsed member? What's the grace period? Trying to get an organization across the business units to agree when they each have their own definition is difficult, to your point earlier, Mark. There's a lack of a crisis, you pointed out, that hasn't forced this to happen yet. They don't have mature IT governance, and therefore the project can't happen. And then there were just two more. One, that it's too large of it, that you mentioned earlier. A lot of people think data governance, oh my, it's going to be a 96-page book. I have to figure out, what my role is and how to use it. And it's just too big to bite off, as opposed to, as you kind of said, Andrew, it's got to be in bite-sized chunks. And then the last one I pulled out of your listening to the three of you was kind of the source systems. How many are there? What data is owned by which system? Who's the data system of record for which type of data? All those things combined, I think, are what keep organizations from reaching that higher level with their data. So that was good stuff.
Yeah. So one thing we've seen is, kind of a way to make progress is making data a part of the daily routine, using it to run meetings or having people look at it. I know, John, that's something that you've, done for sure at AACR, is making sure that people are just looking at the data, even if they're not necessarily using it right away. But I guess, what processes, did you need to introduce or change to make progress on data maturity? Are there other things, besides that, or, what kind of changes did you have to make to help the organization progress?
Yeah, the hardest challenge is, and I know we've highlighted this multiple times, but is to be clear about ownership. And ownership doesn't mean, one single thing. You've heard of the RACI chart, the responsible, accountable, consultant, informed. So we had a version of that because, in Mark's position of having both departments, I think they can bake the entire process in naturally from the beginning. But for us, we had to be really careful because the experts are in the membership department. They are the experts in the membership, and we are the experts in this new system because this is a brand new system. This is a product that we just brought in. We built a team around it. So this is new people to the organization. We didn't have the organizational knowledge that the membership department had. And also there's this fear of, well, we used to have it in this system, or we used to do it this way. So the key for us was to identify, instead of agreeing on who owns what, is to identify what parts of the system needed to be automated and why. And so one example was, when a membership lapses, you still want certain functionality to occur. You may have to pay a different rate for an event, but you still want enablement and engagement. And in a lot of these systems, everything ceases to work immediately because that's tied to a subscription. And subscriptions manipulate all of the capabilities within the system. And so the key was, what do we want to automate, and what's acceptable, and what behavior do we have to introduce manual intervention, and what best way can we facilitate that manual data intervention and put that in the hands of our team, where they don't have to have the thorough knowledge of the model from the contact to the subscription, to the sales orders, to the badge, to understand that huge and very deep operating model. The immediate knee-jerk reaction was, we need access to all that stuff. If something's wrong, we need to manipulate this or that. So our strategy was to actually focus on our internal business, to keep the portal, the customer engagement platform, almost as is, on par with the past, and really focus on building divisional data-centric components so that we could bubble up the concept of, you're a member in good standing or not, you're a member in good standing that has certain functionalities. Bubble that into a very simple component where you can directly manipulate it. You don't have to go through a process. You can switch that from suspended to current, for example, and make it simple and develop something that reverse engineers that single data switch to basically fulfill all of the underlying data objects and make sure that it goes through the right automation so it doesn't destroy the back end of it. So our our strategy was let's give you that control. Let's give you that direct capability because you are the experts and we want to give you the most direct access possible to support the customer. But let's develop something that boils it up into what you're used to using and not have to worry about make you an expert in the system. So that was our strategy, was to focus on engineering solutions and put in what we called responsible technical debt, adding capabilities to the product that we purchased, not because the product couldn't do it, but because we wanted to make it a little bit more, a little simpler, a little bit more flat. So that was really that was how we improved our relationship and really turned it around and turned this more into a partnership, which is why we call our team business engineering, because it means that we're all working together to figure out how the process flows.
So I could jump in though real quickly and just say that similar to what Andrew talked about earlier about making incremental change, that's how we approached a lot of our change and a lot of our maturation around our data processes. Was we identified the really low-hanging fruit, especially in membership services, around what processes are overly cumbersome, what's the member experience. And so I really like our teams to focus on member touch points, because sure, we want to get better internally, we want to create efficiencies, and absolutely, but we really need to look at what's the downstream impact to our members, because that's what's most important. And something I'd point out in that, and sometimes you find, the processes and the changes that you need to make to the business processes are bigger than just the operational activities. One, for instance, for us was with our application process. For our members go through a series of stages and then membership categories up to becoming a fellow of our organization. And the fellow process took up to 4 months. And they had some really old business processes that were probably developed back in the 50s when you had to publish public notices in the newspapers and the likes. And that was just really causing a terrible member experience. And so we built systems to improve the process, but then we had to go back and actually get board buy-in and changes to the bylaws for them to accept that we were doing things differently. And so it was really interesting experience. Like, we knew what the answer was, we knew how to get there, we developed the capabilities, but then we still had to follow the organizational processes to get approval to make those changes.
In listening to Mark and John, it sounds like there was, there were small things you had to do and big things you had to do, right? And that had to do, both answers had a lot to do with process and almost getting teams and people to think differently about your role and, the desired outcomes and your role in achieving the desired outcomes, as well as their role in achieving them. So you, coming into your organizations, brought those perspectives, brought those skill sets, et cetera. So I'm kind of curious whether or not you had to, bring any other skill sets or retool any positions, retrain, were there other skills that you had to bring into the organization beyond just yours and your team?
I can jump in, and maybe I'm a bit biased because I'm a PMP, but we didn't have project management here in the organization, and we didn't have it in IT. And that was a really big hole. It was really quick to understand, like, wait a minute, so many of these projects and stuff just aren't delivering. They're going, completely off the tracks, or we're not even willing to embark on a new project because the last one was so big and so daunting, and it went so horribly bad that PM was a very significant addition that we made to our team, and it's really made a tremendous difference. And certainly we wouldn't have had the successes we did through our more global DTI initiatives if we didn't have really solid project management.
I think that before you jump in, John or Andrew, I think that's huge, and that's a big part of what we tell our clients is, that, for example, say they're working with you, Gravitate, or they're working with an AMS company. Some clients will expect that organization, that company, to provide the PM for the implementation. And they don't have an in-house person like you, Mark, who understands the importance of in-house project management that's just as important as the PM that's going on from the solutions partner. So that's definitely a road to failure without someone like you with that skill set that you brought in. Sorry, John.
And even, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, even the relationships, right? So if you have the internal person and they're really good project manager that's known internally for delivering, they build those relationships and they make it so much easier when you do have to have the conversations around changing business processes or maybe restructuring staffing within a department or a team. Having that internal person that's well respected makes just such a tremendous difference.
And I agree. I was going to comment on Dave that was definitely our struggle is, you know, you bring in a partner or a solution provider, and, you know, I think maybe it was a little naive going into it, but the organization felt that this organization would run the entire project soup to nuts. And, you know, there's a lot of internal project management and resourcing that you have to provide. You can't rely on even the best project manager from the partner organization. And our transformation was different because we really do not have a PMO or an official project management group. So what I had to do is build a team from scratch. And the only person that joined our team that is in our team now that had pre-existed was a business analyst. And so the best thing to do is once we got the platform, and really it's all about trust, by the way, to switch work platforms and get buy-in that the system works, there has to be trust and knowledge and respect. And for us, we knew that somebody had the respect of the organization, had a lot of institutional knowledge, and that's why we turned it into what we call business engineering, because it's a partnership. It's not a project manager or somebody to you know, make you get something done, but it's somebody that understands the organization, has history with the folks involved in the organization, and knows what the skill sets are. And that's a really key part of that, is you have to know what you're working with and make sure that you adjust everything that you do for the right audience, because you can't just go in to marketing and bring in some tool and just say, hey, everything's going to be automated. There are people that know how to develop campaigns, and they have to have a broader understanding. So for us, it was a brand new net team, an entire new framework to achieve this maturity model, but it had to start with internal, you know, somebody really respected, somebody that knows the business, somebody that knows the players, somebody that's had success. And that's how we, and so, yeah, project management is key, and it's not always going to come from a PMO. It's not always going to come from a joint partnership between stakeholders where both divisions can give up a full-time person or a project manager. Sometimes it has to be more of a process than an organization wide. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you know, I don't think we do this anymore, but we used to in the beginning. For the first 5 or 6 years, we would track trust in the IT group and IT levels of maturity, and there were parallel lines, right? The more mature, the higher level of the organization, non-IT staff had trust in the IT group, you know, looking out for their business interests and so on. So you were using that word in your answer, and it reminded me that those were two highly correlated lines in an organization: IT maturity and trust.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure if there are any questions from the attendees, you know, please share them now so that we can address or let our panelists try to answer any of those questions. So if you have questions, you know, now would be the time to put them in. One other question that kind of I have is, you know, I guess, how do you balance the needs of the business with the technology, right? The capabilities of the technology, you know, so how do you make decisions about those trade-offs in terms of, you know, the business process or what the business needs to accomplish, and, you know, the technology, and really, you know, what the capabilities of the technology are?
Andrew, that can be a challenging one sometimes, because you don't buy a system that, you spend, 6 months trying to work through your requirements and coming up with the perfect solution for you as far as a platform, and then completely customize it to meet our business requirements, right? There's got to be some balance there where the various departments and divisions and groups within the organization are willing to change their processes to fit the business solution. And I think that comes back to what John and Dave said. It's trust, right? Do you trust that the IT department has your best interest when making those business decisions, and then are you willing to make those business decisions based on that relationship and that trust?
Yeah, I see that even just kind of internally here with our IT team when we select technology, right? That as long as we're making sure that there's a good way to accomplish what the business needs, there is a lot of that trust, but it has to, people are willing to work with their processes, but that's a great point that it really comes back to the trust, because if you don't have that trust, then people are instinctively going to stick to what they feel like is the right way to do it, regardless of the technology's capabilities. So,
and the good news there is that, looking back 20 years, 15, 20 years ago, that was heresy, right? We're not, the software needs to do what we need it to do the way we need to do it. That was the end result from the business units. And now, last 5 to 10 years, fast forwarding to today, it's the opposite 95% of the time. The association nonprofit client of ours will say, we know we're going to have to adapt some of our business processes and rules to what the system does, because the juice isn't worth the squeeze to customize it in all cases. So that's the good news. I think that the 501c community has adopted that mindset as opposed to 20 years ago. I don't know if you disagree with that, Andrew, because your group is helping organizations
absolutely
implement based on.
It is something. I mean, I feel like it's people presentations like this and going to events, and you hear people talking about it, as well as the experience of people who've kind of done it the other way and then are struggling to kind of get the new things, right? So that over time, sort of seeing that as you said, the juice really isn't worth the squeeze, so that's, I mean, absolutely. It is something that's evolved, which I think is really good news, both for the organizations, as well as the people who are kind of, tasked with, rolling out those systems and doing their jobs, and that flexibility to adjust processes to work, with a system that, it needs to be able to accomplish the task at hand. Is really important.
And if we're waiting for questions, I did have a comment. Is one thing, I'm new to this industry. This is my first nonprofit. I spent most of my career in life sciences, financial services, and what I was really shocked to learn, and what's actually a great thing about this industry, is the users, the internal users of these systems. They care a lot more. They seem to care a lot more about the tools that you put in front of them and how they work than in other sectors. Typically it's, I have to click these buttons to make a sale or to, produce this report. But when you put a tool in the hands of somebody in this industry, that's basically the only thing they have to use to perform their function. And they care a lot more about it. It's more important for them to understand it. And then with the maturity of technology just on your phone and things, I think that there's a greater understanding of what they should expect. And with enterprise projects, things don't move as fast as an app on an app store, and in our specific use case, we're using Salesforce, and a lot of people use Salesforce and know that you can just go to the app exchange and plug something in, but that doesn't translate to working effectively for the organization. And there's this mentality. So there's a lot of intelligence with software, and there's also a little bit more involvement. So that's good and bad. It's something that you have to think about when you talk about process or governance. Is they're going to take more interest. You're not going to develop something in a vacuum and present it to them and tell them to use it. You have to really involve them and iterate. and have many workshops to make sure that everybody understands how it impacts them. So that's just one thing I learned over the past few years.
And I wonder if that's just from listening to you, John, and making that transition. And Mark, I think you made a transition too to the nonprofits, but I wonder if part of that is, and I'm not saying everyone in this community is this way, but there's a lot more people who are in organizations that care about that organization's mission and vision as a natural, and I wonder if that grows into tools and whether or not this really helps us achieve our mission, as opposed to I get more sales commission if I do it right. You know what I mean?
Absolutely agree.
All right, so we are almost out of time. Do we want to do kind of one more final thought for the attendees about this process? I think for me, the thing that we've seen with our clients be most successful is, again, that maintaining that momentum, taking small steps and working within the context to make slow change. Like, it is a process and it is something that is not going to happen overnight. And so being able to continue to provide those wins all through the process keeps people excited and motivated to continue with it. So that would be kind of my big takeaway from this, or thinking about what's the most important factor in getting to data maturity in particular. But I think it applies to IT maturity in general.
What about you, Mark?
Yeah, I would say for me, it starts with a vision. What are we striving towards, and then that way we can have that North Star that's always out there, that we can recognize where the opportunities are and what the needs are to achieve that vision. I would also second that, Andrew, that it's a long process. It takes a lot of time. And just to share a really quick story, when we were first starting our whole data initiative, we were working with our business partner, and I was bemoaning the fact that we can't get good trend information because everything was transactional. We couldn't go back and look 2 or 3 years. And she said to me, "You know what, Mark, when's the best time to plant a tree?" And I'm like, "I don't know." Well, 20 years ago. And I'm like, "Of course it is 20 years ago. I wish I had the data." She said, "What's the second best time?" And I'm like, "I don't know." She said, "Today."
Today.
And I really think that really resonated with me. And I've used that in so many settings, that you've got to start somewhere you have that vision of where you want to be. And, it sucks that you're not there now and you don't have everything that you need, but start today and start planning for the future. And then, we're 3 years in, and looking back, I'm able to get some really important data that we're using every day right now.
That's great. I will definitely use that.
Yeah.
What about you,
John?
John?
I think you've all said it really well, and I guess the only thing I would add is, make sure that you have a process that doesn't just work for IT, but that works for the organization, and make sure that everything is a project and everybody understands there's participation. So you can't add a backlog of requests to IT if you're not available to vet out the solution. So make sure that use the simple 1-to-1 ratio. If you ask IT for something and it's 4 months, then you're probably have to put 4 months into it as well. So just be mindful of every request and the transition and the impact to all when you make any decision.
I like that. If you make a 4-month request, you're involved for 4 months. That's a great way to put it. So I think, Mark, you said the same thing I would have said, which is you have to start with the business requirements, the business objectives, the common vision for what you're trying to accomplish. And without that, it's going to be really hard, no matter how much, you inventory your data and talk through integrations and platforms and reporting needs, without understanding what that, as you put it, North Star is for the vision for the organization's business requirements. It's going to be really hard to beat or measure success in that case.
All right. Well, thank you again to Dave Corial of DelCor, John McKinney of AACR, and Mark Wilson of ACOG. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time out. As a next step, we'd like to offer a conversation to discuss exactly what might be helpful at your organization. We'll be sending a follow-up email to all of you, and it will also contain a scheduling link. So this concludes the webinar. Everyone have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, thanks.